The winter of 1888 did not merely arrive in the Wyoming Territory, it conquered it. The wind tore through the granite peaks of the Bighorn Mountains like a living, malevolent thing, howling across the frozen ridges as if warning anyone foolish enough to be out there that death was not just a possibility, but a promise. The snow had been falling for 3 days straight, a relentless curtain of white that erased the horizon and turned the world into a freezing void. Thaddeus Blackwood pushed through the knee-deep drifts, his heavy buffalo coat pulled tight around his broad shoulders, his breath pluming in thick white clouds before him. A string of ptarmigan hung from his belt, their feathers stiff with frost. At 42, with 15 hard winters behind him on this high-altitude ranch, Thaddeus knew this land better than he knew the lines on his own calloused palms. He trusted the weather more than he trusted men. The mountains might kill you, burying you under a ton of ice without malice, but at least they never lied to you. They never shook your hand while holding a knife behind their back. By the time he reached the main house of his ranch, the Blackwood Spread, as it was known in the valley below, the world was already turning white again. Thick, heavy flakes fell from a slate-gray sky, burying the tracks he had left only minutes earlier. His ranch house stood tucked against a sheltering granite wall, smoke rising lazily from the massive stone chimney he had built rock by agonizing rock. It wasn't a palace, but it was sturdy. It was quiet. And most importantly, it was safe from the world he had left behind long ago. Inside, Thaddeus hung the birds by the heavy oak door, stoked the dying embers of the fire into a roar, and poured himself a cup of bitter, black coffee. The large main room looked the same as it had for a decade. A heavy timber bed in one corner, a rough-hewn table with one chair, and shelves lined with jars of food he had preserved before the winter closed its jaws around the valley. His father's old Henry repeater rifle hung above the fireplace, gleaming in the firelight. Everything in that room had been earned by the sweat of his brow and the ache in his back, and everything in that room reminded him why he lived alone. The cholera outbreak of '76 had taken his parents. The land disputes had taken his brother. And heartbreak, cold and sharp as a butcher's knife, had taken the last soft part of him. When Eleanor chose the wealthy cattle baron from Cheyenne over a struggling rancher with nothing but dirt and determination, Thaddeus had decided the mountains were company enough. They made no promises. They asked for nothing. They gave nothing he couldn't live without. He was halfway through cleaning his revolver, the smell of gun oil sharp in the air, when a sound cut through the oppressive quiet. It wasn't the wind. It was a rhythmic thudding against the wood of the door. Weak. Uneven. Thaddeus froze. His hand drifted instinctively to the Colt peacemaker at his hip. No one came up here in December. The pass was treacherous in July, in winter, it was suicide. Not unless they were lost, desperate, or dangerous. Another sound. A scratch against the wood, then a slide. Thaddeus rose slowly, his boots silent on the floorboards. He approached the door with careful steps, his instincts sharp from years of solitude. Outlaws sometimes use tricks, a feigned injury to draw a man out. But as he listened, he heard a voice. "Gigia. Please." A woman's voice. Shaking, cold, almost too weak to register as human speech. The language was foreign, but the tone of agony was universal. Thaddeus hesitated. Every wall he had built around his heart screamed to keep the world outside. To leave the bar across the door. But there was something in that voice that hooked into his gut. Fear. Loss. The kind of desperation that strips a soul bare. He lifted the heavy wooden bar and cracked the door open, his revolver raised. The sight that greeted him stopped his breath in his throat. Two figures lay collapsed on his doorstep, half buried in the snow that had drifted against the porch. They were not rugged mountain men or lost trappers. They were women. And they were not dressed for the Wyoming winter. They wore identical silk Keong-sams, the fabric a deep, vibrant blue embroidered with gold dragons, now stained with slush and mud. Around their necks, they wore matching bright red scarves, the only flash of color in the blinding white world. They looked like exotic birds that had fallen from the sky into a frozen hell. Thaddeus holstered his gun and shoved the door wide. The wind shrieked, blowing snow into the warmth of the room. He knelt, grabbing the nearest woman. She was ice cold, her skin pale as porcelain, her dark hair plastered to her face. As he lifted her, he looked at the other. They were identical. Mirrors of each other. "Get up," he growled, not out of anger, but urgency. "You freeze, you die." The second woman tried to push herself up but collapsed, her lips blue, her eyes rolling back. Thaddeus didn't think. He couldn't. Not with death standing on his porch. He scooped the first woman up, carrying her inside and depositing her on the rug before the fire. He turned back, grabbed the second, and hauled her in, kicking the door shut with his boot and dropping the bar back into place. The silence returned, but the room felt instantly different. Smaller. Charged. Both women shook uncontrollably, their teeth chattering with a sound like dry bones rattling. Thaddeus moved with efficient speed. He grabbed the thick wool blankets from his bed and draped them over the shivering forms. "You need to get those wet clothes off," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He turned his back, respecting a modesty he wasn't sure they could even comprehend in their state, and went to the stove to heat water. "I'm making tea. It'll warm you from the inside." He heard the rustle of wet silk, the sharp gasps of pain as blood began to flow back into numbed extremities. He kept his eyes on the kettle, his mind racing. Who were they? Where had they come from? The nearest railhead was 40 miles south. The nearest town, broken and lawless as it was a day's ride in good weather. To be here, in this storm, dressed like that. It was impossible. After a few minutes, a soft voice spoke. "So?" Thaddeus turned. They were sitting huddled together under the mountain of blankets, only their faces visible. They looked to be about 25. Their eyes, dark and almond-shaped, held a mixture of terror and profound exhaustion. "Here," Thaddeus said, handing them 2 tin cups of steaming herbal tea. "Drink." The woman on the left took a cup with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Her English was perfect, accented slightly but clear. "My name is Mai. This is my sister, Leanne." Thaddeus nodded, leaning back against the heavy table. "Thaddeus Blackwood. You two have a hell of a story, I reckon. But save it. You're barely alive." Leanne, the sister on the right, took a sip and shuddered, tears leaking from her eyes. We walked from the pass. The carriage. The driver. He tried to, she couldn't finish. She buried her face in the blanket. Mai placed a protective hand on her sister's shoulder. The horses spooked in the storm. The wagon went over the edge. We were thrown clear. The driver. He did not make it. We saw your smoke. You're lucky, Thaddeus said bluntly. Storm like this will bury the whole valley by morning. Another hour out there, and you'd be statues until the spring thaw. We had nowhere else to go, Mai said, her gaze holding his. We are running. From the storm. From men, Leanne whispered, looking up. Bad men. Thaddeus felt his jaw tighten. He knew what fear did to people. He knew what men were capable of when they thought no one was watching. We have no money, Mai added quickly, sensing his hesitation. But we can work. We can cook, clean, mend. We are not useless. Please. Don't put us back out there. Thaddeus looked at the window, where the white flakes were piling up against the glass. He looked at the two women, identical in their beauty and their desperation, clutching his blankets as if they were shields. You can stay until the storm passes, he said gruffly. I don't expect payment. But I don't take to charity neither. You pull your weight when you're able. Leanne reached out a hand, pale and slender, from the blanket. You are a good man, Mr. Blackwood. Thaddeus, he corrected. And I ain't good. I'm just warm. And dry. And that's all you need right now. He turned away to check the fire, missing the look the sisters exchanged, a look of relief so profound it bordered on prayer. But as the two women sat by his hearth, the red of their discarded scarves like pools of blood on the floor, Thaddeus felt the truth settle heavy in his chest. His life would not stay empty much longer. Not with these two women sitting in the heart of his loneliness. Morning came slow and pale, a thin, sickly light pressing through the frosted window panes. Thaddeus sat in his chair by the fire, arms crossed, pretending he hadn't stayed awake most of the night with his rifle across his lap. He had given his bed to the twins and slept in the chair, telling himself it was only for safety. But deep inside, he knew better. Something had shifted the moment he opened his door. Mai stirred first. She emerged from the blankets, wearing one of Thaddeus's spare flannel shirts that swallowed her small frame. She had braided her hair and her sister's hair during the night. She looked different in the morning light, stronger, sharper. "Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. "You should have woken us. You look exhausted." Thaddeus stretched his stiff neck, the vertebrae popping. "Slept in worse places." "You shouldn't have to," Leanne said, emerging next. She moved with a slight limp, favoring her left ankle. Her eyes studied Thaddeus with an intensity that made him want to check his shirt buttons. "Mai told me what you said last night. About staying. Until the storm breaks," Thaddeus confirmed. "Could be days. Maybe a week. We will make ourselves useful," Mai promised. She moved to the pantry with a confidence that surprised him. "Do you have rice? Or flour?" "Flour," Thaddeus grunted. "Bacon. Beans. Preserve jars." Within an hour, the cabin smelled different. Not like stale coffee and wood smoke, but like frying dough and spices. The twins moved around the small kitchen in a synchronized dance, anticipating each other's movements without speaking. One would turn, and the other would hand her a spoon. One would step back, and the other would step in. It was mesmerizing. They sat at the table, eating the simple fried bread and beans. It was the best meal Thaddeus had eaten in 10 years. "So," Thaddeus said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Who are you running from? And don't give me the bad men line. Names." Mai and Leanne exchanged a look. Mai spoke. "Have you heard of Barnaby Finch?" Thaddeus narrowed his eyes. "The railroad tycoon? Owns half the silver mines in Nevada. He bought us," Leanne said, her voice flat. "From our uncle in San Francisco. To be his ornaments. He collects rare things. Jade statues. Ivory carvings. And twins." Thaddeus felt a cold rage ignite in his gut. "He bought you?" "We were being transported to his private estate in the hills near Billings," Mai continued. "We planned to run, but we didn't know the land. When the carriage crashed, it was our only chance. We took our freedom. But Finch, he does not like to lose his property. He will send men." "He'll send Sheriff Pike," Thaddeus said darkly. "Pike is on Finch's payroll. Crooked as a dog's hind leg." "We do not want to bring trouble to your door," Leanne said, her voice trembling. Thaddeus looked at the fire. "Trouble knows the way to my door whether invited or not. You're here now. And on the Blackwood Ranch, we don't hand over people like chattel." The days that followed passed in a strange, hypnotic rhythm. The storm raged on, sealing them in a white tomb, but inside, the ranch house became a world of its own. The twins were not delicate flowers. They were resilient. When Thaddeus went out to check the livestock in the barn, they insisted on coming. They wrapped themselves in layers of his old clothes, looking like bundles of wool, and marched into the snow. They helped him break the ice on the troughs. They pitched hay with surprising strength. One evening, as the wind howled like a banshee, Thaddeus sat cleaning a bridle while Mai and Leanne sat on the rug. Leanne began to hum a melody, a haunting, pentatonic scale that sounded like water flowing over stones. "What is that?" Thaddeus asked. "A song from our village," Mai said. "About a mountain that fell in love with a cloud. They could touch, but never hold each other. Leanne looked at Thaddeus. Don't you get lonely, Thaddeus? All these years? No wife? No family? Thaddeus stopped his work. He looked at the twins, their dark eyes reflecting the firelight, their faces framed by the red scarves they now wore as shawls. I never had a wife, he lied, the words tasting like ash. Not really. Had a prospect once. She wanted the city. I wanted the land. Loneliness is just the price of peace. That is a high price, Mai said softly. Too high. We have always had each other, Leanne added. We do not know loneliness. But we know fear. And sometimes, fear is lonelier than silence. Thaddeus looked away. Stop wanting what you can't have, and it stops hurting. That is how you bury a heart, Mai countered gently. Not how you heal it. On the 5th day, the storm broke. The sun exploded over the mountains, blindingly bright, turning the snow into a sea of diamonds. The beauty was staggering, but Thaddeus knew what the clear sky meant. The pass would be open. He was in the barn, shoeing his mare, when he heard the dogs barking. Not the playful bark, but the deep, guttural warning growl. Thaddeus dropped the hoof and grabbed his rifle from the wall. He emerged from the barn to see 3 riders picking their way through the drifts toward the house. The lead rider wore a tin star that glinted in the sun. Sheriff Amos Pike. Thaddeus strode to the porch, racking the lever of his Winchester. The metallic clack-clack echoed in the frozen air. That's far enough, Amos. Thaddeus shouted. The sheriff pulled up his horse. He was a thick-set man with a face like a slab of raw beef and eyes that held no warmth. He was flanked by 2 deputies who looked more like hired thugs than lawmen. Thad Blackwood, Pike yelled, a false smile plastered on his face. Been a while. You survived the blow. I'm standing, ain't I? Thaddeus replied, not lowering the rifle. What do you want? Looking for some lost property, Pike said, leaning over his saddle horn. Mr. Finch lost a very valuable shipment. 2 Chinese girls. Twins. Wagon went off the road a few miles back. Tracks lead this way. Thaddeus didn't blink. Haven't seen a soul in a week. Storm buried everything. Pike's eyes narrowed. Now, Thad. You wouldn't lie to the law, would you? Finch is offering a hefty reward. $500. For the pair. Alive. I said I haven't seen them, Thaddeus said, his voice dropping an octave. And you know I don't take kindly to trespassers. Law or not. One of the deputies, a man with a jagged scar across his cheek, spat into the snow. I smell smoke, Sheriff. Cooking smoke. Smells. Foreign. Pike chuckled. Maybe we should just take a look inside. Make sure you ain't miss nothing. You cross that fence line, you don't ride back out, Thaddeus warned. Suddenly, the door behind Thaddeus opened. He cursed silently. But it wasn't the twins surrendering. It was Mai and Leanne, both holding old shotguns Thaddeus kept loaded by the back door. They stepped out, their faces hard, the red scarves bright against the drab wood of the cabin. We are not property, Mai shouted, her voice ringing clear. And we are not going back. Pike laughed, a cruel, grating sound. Well, look at that. The kittens have claws. Put the guns down, ladies. You're coming with us. Over my dead body, Thaddeus said, raising the rifle to his shoulder. That can be arranged, Pike snarled. He went for his pistol. Thaddeus fired. The bullet took Pike's hat clean off his head, spinning it into the snow. The sheriff yelped and ducked. The horses reared, screaming. Next one takes your ear. Thaddeus roared. Get off my land. Pike struggled to control his mount. His face turned purple with rage. You're making a mistake, Blackwood. A big one. We'll be back. And we'll bring enough men to burn this coop to the ground. I'll be waiting. The posse wheeled their horses around and galloped off, snow flying from their hooves. Thaddeus watched them until they disappeared into the tree line. He lowered the rifle, his heart hammering against his ribs. He turned to the twins. "You shouldn't have come out." "We fight our own battles," Leanne said, though her hands were shaking on the shotgun. "We're in it now," Thaddeus muttered. "They'll be back by sundown, and they'll bring a dozen guns." "What do we do?" Mai asked. Thaddeus looked at the ranch house. His home. His sanctuary. He knew he couldn't defend it against a siege. Not with 3 people. "We run," he said. "To the high caves. We make them fight on our terms." They spent the next hour in a frenzy of preparation. Thaddeus packed ammunition, dried meat, and blankets. The twins filled canteens and grabbed the medical kit. They strapped on snowshoes. Thaddeus had spare pairs in the shed. "We need to leave a trail," Thaddeus said. "Make them think we're heading for the pass, then double back to the ridge. It's dangerous. One slip and you fall 1,000 feet. "We will not slip," Mai said. They set out as the sun began to dip, casting long, purple shadows across the snow. The climb was brutal. The air was thin, burning their lungs. Thaddeus led the way, breaking the trail, with the twins following in his footsteps. They reached the false trail split and Thaddeus spent precious minutes sweeping the snow to hide their true direction. They climbed higher, into the jagged rocks where horses couldn't follow. By nightfall, they reached the cave. It was a shallow recess in the cliff face, protected from the wind and hidden from below. Thaddeus had stocked it years ago for emergencies, but he had never had to use it. They huddled together in the back of the cave, wrapped in furs. Thaddeus sat near the entrance, watching the valley floor below. Torches flickered in the distance, tiny orange stars moving toward his ranch house. Minutes later, a faint glow appeared. Then it grew. Flames licked the roof of his cabin. The fire spread quickly, consuming the timber and the memories inside. Thaddeus watched his home burn. He felt a hand on his arm. Then another on his other side. Mai and Leanne sat beside him, watching the destruction of the place that had saved them. "I am sorry," Leanne whispered. "This is our fault." "No," Thaddeus said, his voice rasping. "It's just wood and stone. It ain't the home that matters. It's who's inside it." He looked at them. In the flickering light of the distant fire, their faces were fierce and beautiful. "Besides," he added, "I was getting tired of that drafty old place anyway." The twins smiled, a sad but genuine expression. Morning brought the sound of gunfire. Pike's men had found the tracks. They were moving up the ridge on foot. "They're coming," Thaddeus said, checking his revolver. "Stay back. Keep your heads down." "We fight," Mai said, picking up the shotgun. "Together," Leanne added. The first of Pike's men crested the ridge. Thaddeus dropped him with a single shot from his Winchester. The canyon echoed with the crack of the rifle. "Cover fire," a voice shouted from below. Bullets chipped the stone around the cave mouth. Thaddeus ducked, returning fire. It was a standoff. Pike had the numbers, but Thaddeus had the high ground. For an hour, the gunfight raged. Thaddeus was running low on ammo. "They're flanking us!" Mai yelled, pointing to the left. 2 men were climbing a narrow chimney of rock. Thaddeus spun and fired, missing the first man but hitting the second in the leg. The first man scrambled over the lip, raising his pistol. Mai stood up and fired the shotgun. The blast was deafening. The man flew backward, tumbling off the cliff. "Good shot!" Thaddeus yelled. But suddenly, a bullet ricocheted off the wall and struck Thaddeus in the shoulder. He grunted and fell back, his rifle clattering to the stone floor. "Thaddeus!" Both twins screamed. They dragged him back. Leanne tore her red scarf and pressed it against the wound. "Hold pressure!" Pike's voice boomed from below. "Give it up, Blackwood!" You're bleeding out. Send the girls down and we'll let you die quick. Thaddeus gritted his teeth, pain blinding him. Go to hell, Pike. He tried to lift his gun, but his arm wouldn't work. The deputies were advancing. They were going to be overrun. Suddenly, a thunderous boom rolled across the valley. Not a rifle. A buffalo gun. The heavy .50 caliber roar of a Sharp's Big 50. One of the deputies advancing on the ridge seemed to explode, thrown sideways by the massive impact. Another boom. Then another. What in blazes? Pike yelled. Thaddeus looked toward the opposite ridge. A figure stood on a rocky promontory, silhouetted against the sky. A giant of a man with a beard like a bird's nest. Ezra, Thaddeus wheezed, a grin breaking through the pain. Ezra Miller, Thaddeus's nearest neighbor, 10 miles away, had evidently seen the smoke of the burning ranch. And Ezra didn't like claim jumpers or arsonists. You boys are trespassing. Ezra's voice boomed like thunder. And you're interrupting my breakfast. Ezra's boys, 3 sons raised on elk meat and gunpowder, opened fire from the high ground. Pike's men were caught in a crossfire. They panicked. Retreat! Pike screamed. Pull back. But it was too late for the sheriff. Thaddeus, using his good arm, braced his revolver on his knee. He saw Pike trying to scramble down the scree slope. Thaddeus took a breath. He squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the rock right under Pike's boot. The sheriff slipped, tumbled, and slid 200 feet down the icy slope, crashing into a pine tree with a bone-shattering crunch. He didn't get up. The remaining deputies threw down their guns, raising their hands. It's over, Mai whispered, slumping against the cave wall. It's over. Leanne was crying, pressing the red silk against Thaddeus's shoulder. Stay with us, Thaddeus. Stay with us. I ain't going nowhere, Thaddeus murmured, looking at their 2 faces swimming in his vision. I've got too much to do. Recovery was slow. They stayed at Ezra's place for a month while Thaddeus's shoulder healed. The snow melted, revealing the black scar where the Blackwood Ranch had stood. But the foundation remained. The stone chimney still stood, defiant against the sky. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers. Thaddeus, Mai, and Leanne returned to the blackened ruins. They set up heavy canvas tents and began to work. They cleared the debris. They cut new timber. This time, they didn't build a cabin for one man. They built a home for a family. One evening, as the frame of the new house stood skeleton-like against the sunset, Thaddeus sat on a stump, watching the twins saw a plank. They worked in perfect unison, their movements fluid and strong. They had traded the silk Keong Sams for denim and flannel, but they still wore the red scarves tied in their hair. He called them over. They wiped their brows and approached, standing before him. You two could leave, Thaddeus said quietly. Finch is under investigation. The federal marshals have the whole story. You're free. You could go to San Francisco. Find a life. Mai looked at Leanne. Leanne looked at Mai. They turned back to Thaddeus. We have a life, Mai said. We are home, Leanne added. Thaddeus stood up. He felt the weight of the ring in his pocket, a simple band he had hammered out of a silver coin. Or rather, 2 rings. I'm a hard man, Thaddeus said. I'm set in my ways. I've got scars inside and out. But I can't imagine this valley without you. Either of you. He took a breath, the mountain air filling his lungs. I can't choose. I won't choose. You are 2 halves of the same soul, and somehow, you've become the other half of mine. He pulled the rings out. I don't know the law on it. And I don't damn well care. But if you'll have me, I want to marry you. Both of you. The twins stared at the rings. Tears welled in their eyes. Yes, they said in unison. A week later, a circuit judge named Old Man Calloway passed through. He owed Thaddeus a life debt from a blizzard in '82. He didn't ask questions. They stood on the porch of the half-finished house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent purples and oranges. Thaddeus stood in a clean shirt, holding his hat. Mai and Leanne stood opposite him, wearing new dresses they had sewn, the red scarves draped over their shoulders. "Do you, Thaddeus Blackwood, take these women?" Calloway asked, raising an eyebrow but keeping his voice solemn. "I do," Thaddeus said firmly. "And do you, Mai and Leanne, take this man?" "We do," they answered together. Calloway closed his book. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, and by the laws of common sense which say a man shouldn't argue with happy folks, I pronounce you man and wives." Thaddeus stepped forward. He kissed Mai, then he kissed Leanne. The loneliness of 12 long years didn't just melt away, it was burned away by the warmth of two hearts beating against his. That evening, as the stars wheeled overhead, Thaddeus sat on the porch swing he had just hung. Mai sat on his left, Leanne on his right. Their heads rested on his shoulders. "I never had a wife," Thaddeus murmured, looking out at the moonlit peaks. Mai squeezed his hand. Leanne squeezed the other. "Now you do," they whispered. And for the first time in his life, Thaddeus Blackwood believed that the mountains, despite their beauty, were the second best thing in his world.